Resident Evil 8 is going to probably be coming out here at some point or another in the foreseeable future. And I've talked about on the YouTube channel the things that we kind of know about the game and such. But one thing in particular that I really feel that we need to kind of eye in on is the multiplayer aspect of Resident Evil 8 and if this is something that we will maybe see in this game. So let's talk about it, guys. Resident Evil 8, guys, is supposedly, according to rumors and leaks and things of that nature, it's stated that Chris Redfield is going to be the primary character that this game is going to focus around. There's rumor that it's going to be a continuation of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which I wouldn't mind that either. As far as if Chris Redfield is going to be the playable character, that's another interesting thing, because at the very end of Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, spoilers for all of you who have not played the game at this point, seems to be Chris Redfield is kind of one of the last figures that you see at the end of Resident Evil 7. And so it looks to be that maybe Chris Redfield is going to be the guy moving forward here, if this is the direction they decide to go in. Now, what does this have to do with multiplayer? Well, look, guys, there's been in the past, I'll remember Resident Evil 5, I believe it was, when that came out, you're still playing kind of as Chris Redfield, and you have multiplayer elements. You had a full-blown story. You had, obviously, those games, guys, felt more of like action games. And see, Resident Evil 7, what I loved about Resident Evil 7 was that they got back to the roots, making it really eerie and unnerving experience, which is exactly what Biohazard was, in my personal opinion. A very unnerving experience. One of the scariest games I've ever played, guys. I thought it was a terrifying experience. And I've played a lot of horror games. If you guys know me from the YouTube channel, I love playing horror games. I love to watch horror movies, and I've got to say that that was an unnerving experience without a doubt, and I want to see a continuation of that in Resident Evil 8. Part of me feels, though, that if they move in the direction of, kind of following right after Resident Evil 7, I feel like it might not be quite as claustrophobic, as terrifying, especially if you're going to see kind of what's going on with the Umbrella Corporation and things of that nature. Now, obviously, they could take it a million different ways, right? But I think taking the helm as Chris Redfield once again would that kind of implies that you would be it would be moving in a direction of more action versus that of what you saw in Resident Evil 7 as far as horror is concerned. Now, obviously, horror action, there's nothing wrong with that, guys. You can see a lot of games out there. Dead Space, which is another terrifying experience. That game had a lot of action elements, obviously, as well as horror elements. So you could certainly do that in Resident Evil 8. But what does that lead you to with multiplayer? Well, if they're moving in this direction of action, you definitely could see more so of a multiplayer experience coming into the fold, similar to like with Resident Evil 5, like I was saying, which was one of my favorite experiences when it came to the Resident Evil series from an action perspective. It was probably my favorite one. And as far as from an action perspective, multiplayer perspective, and I would love to see that continue moving into Resident Evil 8, especially if you're going to take the helm or, take control of Chris Redfield once again. I obviously want those, horror elements to be in it. I'd love to see some of the creatures come back from Resident Evil 5. I would love, to see, some differences, some like familiar territory as well as some differences. So, multiplayer. Will there be multiplayer in Resident Evil 8? It really depends on the direction that they go, guys. If they go in the direction of Chris Redfield, more of an action-based kind of game, I highly would anticipate a multiplayer experience. If they decide to continue moving forward with the horror elements and kind of like, those claustrophobic moments and such, they might very well not decide to do a multiplayer experience there. Now, if Resident Evil 3, the remake, it kind of gives us a preview of what's maybe to come, the multiplayer experience in Resident Evil 3 kind of reminds you somewhat of Dead by Daylight, and maybe they could go in that direction if they made Resident Evil 8 similar to that of Resident Evil 7. And I've always said this, guys, I always felt that having more content is better than having less content, and that being In a Resident Evil game, I believe that having a full package is the best part about it. Resident Evil 5 was the last game in the series that I actually purchased myself because it was a full package deal. I mean, you were getting a multiplayer experience, you were getting single player experiences. Having co-op experiences and things of that nature also really help add value when you're paying $60 for a title. I rented the other two, you know, of course, Resident Evil 6 and then, of course, Resident Evil 7. Even though I thought Resident Evil 7 was an incredible game, it doesn't justify paying $60 for just a single player story, at least in my opinion. You need to have more ways in which you can connect with that franchise. After that campaign's done, going and finding other ways and playing and connecting with the franchise in more ways than one is really, really important in my opinion. And so Resident Evil 8 would be smart to not only have, whether you want to take the reins of Chris Redfield once again and have a single player story based around him, that's fine. I'd love to have some more horror elements. The other question is it first person or is it third person? Well, you had that first person perspective in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 5. Of course, you had that third person perspective. So you've got different perspectives here. And so a lot of everything rides on a couple of those big questions, guys, that we don't know as of yet. But if the rumor is true, that it is going to focus around Chris Redfield and Resident Evil 8, I would say we're going to get a third-person perspective. Once again, probably more of an action horror versus just a straight-up horror game. And that would lead me to believe that a multiplayer experience has to be something that they've got to be thinking about over at Capcom. Why not making you got to make a multiplayer experience, in my opinion, for this game if you want to continue bringing people back. DLC and things of that nature, guys, is only going to bring people back for a period of time, like it did with Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, which I thought definitely could have really used something like what they did in Resident Evil 3, the remake, having a Dead by Daylight type of multiplayer experience, something that's just going to bring people back to the game. I think that, at the end of the day, is what you want. You want people to coming back to your game. We've talked about this with other Capcom titles like Devil May Cry. You know, bringing people back to a franchise so that they're not going onwards to other franchises, I think is just a really smart business decision. Even if it's a pretty cookie cutter multiplayer experience, people who love the franchise are going to continue playing it as long as it's supported and the developers are listening to what the fan base wants. But at the end of the day, guys, I do believe that Capcom would be smart to add a multiplayer experience, regardless of which way they decide to go. I think I might like to see Chris Redfield as the focus point in the next game, but I'd like it to be more of a horror experience versus that of an action experience. Maybe have a little bit more of a broad scope than what Resident Evil 7 was, which was basically just in one home. I'd like to have a little bit more of a broader scope, but at the same time, you know, bigger is not always better. But I would love to have a conversation about it, guys. Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys want to see a Resident Evil 8 based around Chris Redfield and then it's like a third-person shooter, like an action meets horror? Or would you rather it be kind of like Resident Evil 7, where it's more of a intimate, very horror, you know, based type of game? What direction you guys want them to go in? Let me know in the comment section below. And for more Resident Evil 8 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.